Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is Grammar Lesson 7 on the simple past tense. So, what do you already know? Try to answer these questions. When should you use the simple past tense? How do you make the simple past tense for regular verbs? And can you name 5 verbs with irregular past tenses? Or can you name 10 or 20? There are a lot. So first, when should you use the simple past tense? Well, first of all, you can use the simple past when a single action is completely finished. So for example, Greta watched the movie. That means she watched the movie, she finished watching the movie, she's not watching it anymore. Or you can use the simple past to describe many actions that are completely finished. Like Greta watched the movie 5 times. So this is many times that she watched the movie, but they're all finished. She's not watching the movie anymore. All these times that she watched it are in the past. Okay, so next we're going to ask, how do we make the simple past for regular verbs? And to do this, usually we just add the ending D or ED. So this is another common suffix. Remember suffixes from grammar lesson 6? So D or ED is another common suffix that shows us when a word is in the past tense. So in this first column, we see that for most regular verbs, we just add ed. So help becomes helped, look becomes looked, attend becomes attended, participate becomes participated. So for short verbs, long verbs, usually we just add ed. In the second column, we see if a verb already has an e at the end, just add the d. So smile becomes smiled, wave becomes waved, love becomes loved, bake becomes baked. We just add the D. That's it, right? So there are no helping verbs with the past tense. We don't use any other verbs to make the past tense, just the regular verb with an ed, unless you're asking questions, which we'll do in a different grammar lesson. Today we're just going to do regular sentences that aren't questions. So some regular verbs have other rules, of course. So let's look at this first column. Sometimes we have to add an extra letter before we add the ed. So if a verb ends with one vowel, so remember vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and then a consonant, so consonants are the rest of the letters, then we have to double the consonant before adding ed. So look at this word nap. Nap has one vowel and one consonant. So to make this past tense, napped, we add an extra P and then the ed. Okay, so nap means to sleep for a short amount of time. Similarly, in the next word, hug, that's when you put your arms around someone to show that you care about them. And then you give them a little squeeze. So hug has a U, a vowel, before one consonant, the G. So before we add the ed, we have to add another G, hugged. Or the next example, rip, has one vowel before a final consonant. So before we add the ed, we have to add another P. And same thing with stop. The reason why we do this is for pronunciation purposes. If we did not add this extra vowel, then the words that we make by adding ed would sound completely different. So instead of napped, we would have naped, and hugged would be huged, and ripped would be riped, and stopped would be stoped. This is for pronunciation purposes. So this rule is true for all the consonants, but in the second column, not for W or X. If we have a word that ends in a vowel and then the consonants W or X, just add the ed. So box becomes boxed, showed becomes showed, allows stays allowed. No, we don't put 2 X's or 2 W's. Okay? And there's also some extra rules for the consonant Y. If you've studied spelling a little bit, you know that we say that the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. So Y has some special rules for it. So if you have a vowel before the Y, like play, you just add the ed. So play, enjoy, stay, pray, just add the ed. However, if you have a consonant before the Y, like in try, Then we have to change the Y into the letter I and then add ed. So try becomes tried, or hurry, to move fast, becomes hurried. And the same with spy or pretty. Okay? These are just some rules that you will have to remember for when you are writing and trying to spell your past tense verbs correctly. Then we have the irregular verbs. So were you able to think of some irregular verbs? When you are studying English, most people memorize the irregular verbs in these sets of 3. The present tense, the simple past tense, and the past participle. So you might remember in your English classes saying, go, went, gone, have, had, feel, felt, do, did, done. And that's because there is really no better way to remember these irregular verbs. You just have to remember them. And there are lots of irregular verbs, unfortunately. So memorizing is one way to learn them all. And another way to remember the irregular verbs is just to read a lot. Reading will help you to remember the irregular verbs because you'll see them being used, and also listening to them. So listening to people talking in your listening exercises, movies, TV shows, etc. So here's a list of some of the most common irregular verbs. But there's good news. When you use the irregular verbs, you don't have to conjugate the past tense. And the same thing is true for regular verbs. So when you use any verb in the past tense, you don't have to conjugate. So for example, in the present tense, you have to say, I look, you look, we look, they look, but she, he looks. But in the past tense, for all the subjects, it's just looked. I looked, you looked, we looked, they looked, she looked. And the same is true with the irregular verbs. So even though you have to say, I do, you do, we do, they do, she, he does, for past tense, we all did. She did, he did, we did, they did, I did, you did. The one important exception is for the verb be, which is our very irregular verb. So in the present tense, you would say I am, but the past tense is I was. And you would say you are, we are, they are, but the past tense is you were, we were, they were. And for she and he, in the present tense it's is, and in the past tense it's was. So this verb is, obviously the most common verb, and it is the most irregular. You just have to remember it and practice it. But the more you read and the more you listen, the easier it will be. Okay, so let's just practice. Let's look at these sentences and see which ones are in the simple past tense. So you might say, oh, this is going to be super easy, but actually looking and recognizing the simple past tense isn't always easy. So pause the video, read through these sentences, and see which ones you think are in the simple past tense, and then unpause the video and we'll talk about the answers. Okay, so let's look at the answers. So number 1, every day I get hungry at noon. This is not in the simple past tense because get is the present tense, and this is every day. So remember, every day is something that is not finished. So for things that happen every day, we should use the present tense, the simple present tense, from grammar lesson 2. Number 2, yesterday I walked to the bus stop. This, yes, is the simple past tense. We have the ed ending because it's a regular verb, and this is finished. This happened yesterday. Number 3, last month I saw my friend 3 times. So this happened 3 times, but they're all times that are finished last month. And this is the verb see in the past tense, which is irregular, and it's saw. Number 4, she finished studying an hour ago. This is also the simple past. We have the ed ending, and this is completely finished an hour ago. Number 5, they have lived here for 6 years. So even though we have the ed ending here, this is not the simple past tense because of the helping verb have. This verb tense is called the present perfect tense. And we can also tell that it's not the simple past tense because of the for 6 years. So if you have lived somewhere for 6 years, that means you are still living there. This is an action that is not finished. So this is not the simple past tense. Number 6, we'd gone on vacation when they robbed our house. So we have 2 different verb tenses here. The first, had gone, is not the simple past. This is called the past perfect because we have the helping verb had and a past participle, gone. And then the second verb is robbed. And robbed, we see the ed, there's no helping verb, and this is the simple past. And the past perfect shows us that something happened before this event in the past. So when they robbed our house, this is in the past, and we had gone on vacation before that happened. This verb tense, the past perfect, is something that we saw a lot last week in our listening and reading, Losing Chris, and we're going to see it a lot again in this class, class 7, when we finish the story. But it will be in this week's reading, so just if you want to look for it, you might be able to find it. And number 7, he wanted to help protect the environment. This is also the simple past. It's got the ed ending, and it is a regular verb showing us that this is something that happened in the past. Okay, let's practice some more. So let's complete these sentences with the verb tense of the given verb. So remember, we have rules for making the simple past. So in these 8 sentences, you're going to see some verbs that are in the past tense, some that aren't, and some that will be regular, and some that will be irregular. So pause the video, go through these 8 sentences, and then unpause the video to see the answers. So number 1, last night I watched a scary movie. The verb watch is a regular verb, so we just add an ed. Number 2, on Mondays, Carrie goes to the gym. So for number 2, we should not use the simple past because this happens every Monday. We need to use the simple present tense. Number 3, my aunt came to my house for dinner last weekend. So this is the past tense of come, which is irregular, came. And then the second part, have, is also irregular. We need to say had, which is the past of have. Number 4, remember that be is one of our very irregular verbs. We would say Leela was very sad when her cat died last year. So because die is a regular verb that ends in an E, we just add D. Number 5, the children played outside yesterday afternoon. So remember, verbs that have an AY ending, like a vowel and then the letter Y, we'll just add an ED. Number 6, yesterday we washed the car after it got dirty. So this is the simple past. We just add an ED to the end of wash, and the past tense of get is got. Number 7, Stuart did his homework before he went to bed last night. So the past tense of do is did, and the past of go is went. And then number 8, we use the past of stop, and because stop ends with a vowel consonant combination, we have to double the P to make it stopped. So that's all for today's lesson, but there is a lot in that, so you really should practice some more. 8 sentences is not enough practice. So make sure you go to the website and get the Class 7 grammar worksheet so you can get more practice making the past tense. I know there's a lot to remember, but practice will make it easier. So thanks for joining us today, and I hope we'll see you for the listening lesson.